Well, hey guys, welcome to the studio. Today, lyric writing and why it's important for us as producers to at least be able to have some basic skills at this. We got a lot to go over. I've got tips and tricks that I use that help me a great deal. Let's get to it. Over the past month and a half or so, I've had my hands on a few different projects where I've been co-writing, which is kind of my main job, but also writing some original lyrics. And this is the product of what I've been working on. These are all lyrics for songs that we use for collaborations that happen in the group or in my professional life as a producer. While I was putting this show together, I realized the easiest thing for me to do is tell you what not to do. But if I just add to your list of things not to do, nothing will get done because we've all faced that blank piece of paper. I'm going to try to spend the bulk of my time giving you ideas that will help you actually get something written down on that piece of paper. Which leads me to tip number one. If you've got a blank piece of paper in front of you, chances are it's going to stay blank. Why? The chance of inspiration striking while you're sitting there with a pen and a piece of paper or about to key something into your phone is next to zero. It's like walking around on a sunny day thinking you might get struck by lightning. Probably doesn't work that way. So my very simple trick that I use is I will write myself a text. If I hear one or two or three words that I think to myself, that might sound cool in a song. It's that simple. And here's tip two. It's very much tied to tip number one. You want to listen to yourself. You want to listen to people around you, or listen to actors on television or movies, or even songs that you like. And if something really captures you, a small group of words, you should write that down or text it to yourself like what I do and come back to it later. You have seeds for projects all around you all the time. And don't forget that I said, listen to yourself. A lot of times a good lyric will come across as you speaking to a friend. So tip number three, very simply, speak like a normal human being. Be conversational, as if you're talking to a friend. Those lyrics will get heard by your listener as if you were a friend talking to them, and they'll be a lot more receptive to them. Tip number four for getting something started is to imagine, where does your song take place? The setting for the song. A mountaintop, under 5 miles of ocean water, a deserted island, on the moon, at your school, at your work. Where is this taking place? Also, are there characters in your song? The most common characters are I and you, or he and she, or they, but you can give them specific names if you want. And how about some kind of a conflict or some kind of a question? Something about these characters in this place that have a reason to be there that might not be the easiest thing in the world to deal with. And what is that? Which leads me to tip number five. If you imagine that you have a setting and characters and some kind of a conflict, well, how do you know that? You must be seeing them or listening to them. Fact is, you have 5 senses. And a good question to ask yourself and write down these answers. You imagine yourself in the situation and you ask yourself, what do I see? Or who do I see? What am I hearing? What do I feel? Is there something that I can smell or possibly taste? You don't have to answer all 5 questions, but if you answer these questions about what you sense while you are in that situation, those can become lyrics. And tip number 6 is kind of tied to that. Imagine that you're a newspaper reporter and whatever is happening in your song is something that you have to write a report on. Well, what does the reporter do? But they ask a couple simple questions. Who? Who's there? What? What's happening? When? When did this happen? Why? Why did it happen? Who, what, when, where, why? You answer those questions in your mind as you're envisioning the situation you're writing your song about, and write the answers down. And those lines can be lyrics as well. And that brings me to tip number 7. Now that you have some basic ideas from the reporter's outlook or what your senses are telling you about this situation, ask yourself, what is that like? Well, I'm talking about metaphor or simile. If I'm saying that, it's like a sunrise on a winter morning, well, that's something that I can talk about as being a metaphor or a simile in the song that I'm writing. And at this point, you should have a lot of stuff written down on your piece of paper, and it's not really a lyric yet, but we're going to start looking at it in terms of what are the rhythms of the things that you have written down. If you have written down something like it was a sunset on a winter morn, it was a sunset on a winter morn. However you decide to time that, you want to make sure that this has a rhythm or a cadence that is going to fit with the song that you're trying to write. And tip number 9 is to throw in a twist. If your whole song is about you went down to the local shop and bought yourself a lottery ticket and scratched it off and won $50, that's a cool story. But what if you were immediately died of a heart attack? And I know that's a little bit morose. However, it's a twist. It's something that we didn't expect coming. Do you have to put a twist into every song? No, but keep in mind that's something that you can do to keep your song interesting. Now, those 9 tips are what I do so I can get something written down on a piece of paper. And I will often go back and say, well, I kind of like this line, or this is a kind of a cool idea. And then I grab another piece of paper and I start writing based on what are my strongest lines and how I think that I want this story to evolve into a song. Now, this doesn't fall under my normal tips of how to get going, but I want you to consider something. If you watched Get Back, the documentary on the Beatles that is on Disney Plus, I think, you may have seen them writing gibberish. Obla-dee, obla-da, life goes on, brah. A lot of times when they're writing a song, they're choosing words more for sound than for meaning. And they're more worried about getting it to mean something after the fact. It's not something that I normally do, but it is something that I can rely on, especially if I'm trying to get lyrics to sound cooler rather than drive a story forward. Something worth considering. And there's a few things that you probably want to avoid. Some pitfalls. Some things that a poor lyric writer will probably fall into. So I've got 5 tips that will help you to avoid these pitfalls. And I'm going to lead off with a little story. When I was back in college, I took a lyric writing course. And the first day of the course, the professor came into the class. There was only about 5 of us, and she's a little tiny, maybe 5 foot, tight bun of hair. And she comes in, she stands in front of her desk. She's got a huge briefcase. And she looks at us and she says, I know about love. I once had a dove. It sat on my glove. I gave it a shove. The first one of you idiots that writes that lyric, I'm throwing the hell out of the class. And we were all like, oh, and she slammed her briefcase down on her desk, and we were all very, very frightened by that. But she was making one of the most important points that I'm aware of as a lyric writer. So I'm going to make this rule number 1 of things to avoid. Don't force the rhyming. Don't choose words that rhyme because they rhyme. Your listener will see right through it. And your listeners are not dumb. If they listen to a song that sounds like those 4 lines that I just recited to you, they're immediately going to think this is not a good lyric. Even if the story that you unfold is fantastic, it's going to seem really 5th grade. Which leads me to tip number 2 of things that you should not be doing. Your goal is to sound conversational. We talked about in things that you should be doing. So try not to use words that you don't use normally in a conversation. Avoid big $2 words like diatomaceous. If you're not honestly talking to your friends about what diatomaceous is or things that are diatomaceous, don't write that as a lyric. It's just going to sound really awkward. Or one of my other favorite examples, Old English. I wrote a song when I was back in high school called Hewn in Steel. Hewn. Hewn. Hewn in steel. Yeah, let's leave the Old English to the Old English. And tip number 3, don't lecture people. Don't tell them you need to think this. Don't tell them they need to believe something that you may believe with all of your heart. The word for that is professorial. And while we're talking about tip number 2 and giant words that you probably wouldn't use in a lyric, professorial, the root of that word is professor. If you come across as sounding like a professor lecturing your audience about what they should think or how they should act, people don't want to be lectured. It's better to show somebody something maybe by example or by parable, as they do in the Bible. These things just are more effective. And tip number 4 is kind of linked to that. It's don't ridicule your listener. The Rolling Stones had a song called Stupid Girl. And it wasn't necessarily ridiculing their listener, but it was really condescending and negative and talking about people in a very derogative kind of way. It's super negative. Your listeners are going to pick up on it. I don't recommend it. And finally, tip number 5. Don't use cliches. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. That which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Now, I know lyricists have been getting away with this, which is fine. You might even find a decent lyric somewhere that abounds with cliches. However, if you're basing your lyric writing on cliches and sayings and popular ways of, to coin a phrase, that type of thing, I think you're really kind of missing out on what a lyric really should be doing, which is really telling a story or making a point. I want to leave you with this. Some people write a decent lyric and they're not necessarily the singer. For example, Elton John, great lyrics, they were all written by Bernie Taupin. Or Iron Maiden, those lyrics were all written by the bass player, not the vocalist. Even if you're not the singer, basic lyric writing can be something that you can bring into a project, which is very helpful. And today's modern producers kind of have their hands on all sorts of things, from not just arranging the song and where's the chorus coming in, or dialing in the sound to give your song an interesting kind of a vibe to it, or talking about maybe the tempo or the rhythms. We also pay attention to the lyrics as they're presented by the artist. And sometimes we can hear something that they may have missed in terms of how they're timing or how they're pronouncing something or where they're falling on the beat or even the word that they've chosen. And the better we are at the basics of writing lyrics, the more we can help their artists. And the more we can help their artists, the better their product will be. And in the end, the producer that's turning out the better product is going to be the producer that more artists look to have them produce their music. Well, guys, I had a lot of fun putting this together. I hope I didn't bore you with too many do's and don'ts. That was quite the list today. But I do feel very strongly that we should at least be able to run some kind of basic lyric writing in our everyday work as producers. I hope you found this helpful. We're going to continue this discussion over in our Facebook group, Recording Tips. You should pop in over there, join up with the conversation, and while you're here, click subscribe if you don't mind. The more subscribers a channel has, the easier it is for them to lure in more experts into their discussions. Well, we got a lot of work to do. Let's get to it.